Romance fraud is when people use fake profiles or grooming or other techniques to deceive individuals into believing that they're in a relationship, usually for some sort of financial gain. With romance fraud, it can really be anybody. It's a really interesting crime in that it's really just a matter of identifying a person's specific vulnerabilities, right? Everyone has some vulnerability, and I think that the one thing about fraud that everyone needs to understand is that there's a fraud out there for everyone. We see a lot of romance fraud that targets people who are recently bereaved, for instance. We see romance fraudsters going through obituaries to identify people who might be especially vulnerable or susceptible. That's especially important because these are people who might have been out of the dating scene for quite a few years, right? Especially if they're just having their marriage end in that way, right? So that's definitely a group that is very vulnerable, but it's not just limited to that. There's definitely other groups that are also susceptible to experiencing romance fraud. One of the biggest techniques that folks use to perpetrate romance fraud, especially against folks with disabilities, is just sort of grooming techniques, right? It's not necessarily a quick, rapid, give me all your money now style fraud. Romance frauds are characterized by the slow building of trust over time. And for folks who have disabilities, they might be especially susceptible to engaging in that sort of trusting relationship, right? These are people who might not necessarily have the same exposure to healthy relationships, sexual education. And if we talk about that, there's sexual education and understanding romance fraud kind of go hand in hand. Folks don't necessarily meet their romantic partners in a library or a coffee shop or a bar anymore. We usually meet folks online. It's kind of hard to separate the idea of understanding romantic and sexual health and welfare with the internet. Folks with disabilities are often excluded from conversations regarding sexual health, right? If we see sex ed programs in elementary school, middle school, high school, we often see that there's a very paternalistic approach, unfortunately, when it comes to persons with disabilities who are often sort of excluded from these conversations. And unfortunately, these same folks are often excluded from conversations about using the internet safely. So it almost sets up this sort of perfect storm for vulnerability among persons with disabilities to experience these crimes like romance fraud, where these really tricky tactics like grooming can play a really important role in shaping vulnerability. The dangerous thing about these kinds of crimes is they're persistent. They are a year-round threat, and we're especially starting to see sort of the evolution of romance fraud into these frauds that are very unfortunately referred to as pig butchering scams. I know that's a very visceral name for these types of frauds, but these are frauds that kind of mix romance fraud with more of an investment scheme angle. So it utilizes the same grooming techniques and the same relationship building and rapport building over time, but instead of simply leveraging that romantic relationship or the appearance of a romantic relationship for financial gains, these fraudsters are actually able to leverage that to deceive victims into making fraudulent investments in cryptocurrencies or other sorts of online transactions. And unfortunately, these pig butchering scams result in severe financial losses, one of the most costly forms of fraud. I think one of the best things that you can do is just take time. Whenever you meet someone online, take 5 minutes, take time to think about the profile, think about who you're talking to, think about how the relationship started, how the conversation started, right? A lot of these romance fraudsters, they're very quick to initiate conversation, quick to engage. And I think sometimes just asking yourself, is this situation too good to be true? Or is this something that maybe doesn't seem right? This doesn't feel right. Just maybe taking time to pause, but also using some of our open source investigation techniques that we have at our disposal, right? If we have a romance fraud that occurs online, there's usually going to be an online profile, and all these online profiles have pictures. So if you see someone that you think might be a romance fraudster or a fraudster more generally, take those pictures and run them through a reverse image search tool. Do some searches of this person's name and identity. See if they have any other corroborating profiles, right? If this is the only evidence of this person that you can find online, if this is their only digital footprint, that's definitely a big red flag.